Chapter 8. I dragged the typewriter into the ranch house where I live. I was gasping for breath. My arms had gone numb. Mom and Dad were in the living room. They sat side by side on the couch doing a crossword puzzle together. They love crossword puzzles. I'm not sure why. Both of them are terrible spellers. They can never finish a puzzle. Lots of times they end up fighting about how to spell a word. Usually they give up and rip the puzzle to pieces. Then, a few days later, they start a new one. They both looked up as I lugged the typewriter towards my room. "What's that?" Mom demanded. "It's a typewriter." "I know that. I meant, where did you get it?" "It's a long story." Dad climbed up from the couch and hurried over to help me. "Wow, it weighs a ton. How did you ever carry it home?" he said. I shrugged. "It wasn't so bad," I lied. We carried it to my room and set it down on my desk. I wanted to try it out right away, but Dad insisted that I return to the living room. I told them the whole story, about lightning hitting the store, about going in to explore, about Miss Carter, and how she gave me the typewriter. I left out the part about the bad electrical shock that knocked me to the floor. My parents are the kind of people who get upset very easily. I mean, they start yelling and screaming over crossword puzzles. So, I never tell them much. I mean, why ruin their day? Or mine? "Why do you need an old typewriter?" Mom asked, frowning at me. "No one uses typewriters anymore. You only see them in antique shops." "I want to write my scary stories on it," I explained. "What about your new computer?" Dad demanded. "What about the printer we gave you?" "I'll use that too," I said. "You know, for schoolwork and stuff like that." Mom rolled her eyes. "Next, Zachy will be writing with a feather quill and inkwell," she said. They both laughed. "Very funny," I muttered. I said goodnight and hurried down the hall to my room. I turned the corner that led to my bedroom and stopped. What was that strange crackling sound? It seemed to be coming from my room, a steady, crackling buzz. "Weird," I muttered. I stepped into the doorway, peered into my room, and gasped. Chapter 9. "My typewriter!" I cried. The typewriter was bathed in a bright blue glow. Blue sparks buzzed and crackled off and flew in all directions. I stared in amazement as the blue current snapped and hummed over the typewriter. I thought about the shock that had knocked me to the floor in the antique shop. Had the typewriter stored up some of that electricity? No, that was impossible. But then, why was the typewriter glowing under a crackling blue current now? "Mom! Dad!" I called. "Come here! You have to see this!" They didn't reply. I hurtled down the hall to the living room. "Quick! Come quick! You won't believe this!" I shouted. They had returned to their crossword puzzle. Dad glanced up as I burst into the room. "How do you spell peregrine?" he asked. "It's a kind of falcon." "Who cares?" I cried. "My typewriter! It's gonna blow up or something!" That got them off the couch. I led the way, running full speed down the hall. They followed close behind. I stopped at my doorway and pointed to my desk. "Look!" I cried. All three of us peered across the room. At the typewriter, the black metal typewriter, with its black roller and rows of black keys, ringed with silver. No blue electrical current. No sparks. No crackle or buzz. Just an old typewriter sitting on a desk. "Funny joke," Dad muttered, rolling his eyes at me. Mom shook her head. "I don't know where Zachy gets his sense of humor. Not from my side of the family." "Your side of the family doesn't need a sense of humor. They're already a joke," Dad snapped. They walked off arguing. I edged slowly, carefully into my room. I crept up to the typewriter. I reached out a hand. I lowered it towards the typewriter. Lowered it until it was less than an inch away. Then I stopped. My hand started to shake. I stared down at the solid dark machine. Should I touch it? Would it shock me again? Slowly, I lowered my hand. Chapter 10. Alex slammed her locker shut. She adjusted her backpack and turned to me. So what happened? Did the typewriter zap you? It was the next morning. Spring vacation was over. School had started again. I had hurried down the hall to our lockers to tell Alex the whole typewriter story. I knew she was the only person in the world who would believe me. No, it didn't zap me, I told her. I touched it, and nothing happened. I pushed down some of the keys. I turned the roller. Nothing at all. Alex stared hard at me. Nothing? Nothing. That isn't a very good story, she teased. It has a very weak ending. I laughed. Do you think it would be better ending if I got fried? Much better, she replied. It was late. The first bell had already rung. The hall was nearly empty. I'm going to rewrite the blob monster story, I told her. I have a lot of new ideas. I can't wait to start working on it. She turned to me. On the old typewriter? I nodded. I'm going to make the story longer and scarier. That old typewriter is so weird. I know it's going to help me write scarier than ever, I exclaimed. I heard giggling. I spun around and saw Emmy and Annie Bell. They're twins. They're in our class. Adam came trailing after them. He punched me in the shoulder, so hard I bounced against the lockers. Emmy and Annie are good friends with Adam, but not with Alex and me. They both have curly red hair, lots of freckles, lots of dimples. The only way to tell Emmy from Annie is to ask, which one are you? Emmy grinned at me. I think it was Emmy. Do you really believe in monsters? She asked. They both giggled, as if Emmy had asked something really funny. Maybe, I replied. But I wasn't talking about real monsters. I was talking about a scary story I'm writing. And then I added nastily, you two wouldn't understand since you haven't learned to write yet. Ha ha, they both said sarcastically. You're so funny, Zachy. Funny looking, Adam added, the oldest joke in the universe. But do you believe in monsters? Emmy insisted. Adam says you do, her sister added. Adam says you think a monster lives under your bed. I do not. They both giggled. Adam is a liar, I cried. I tried to grab him, but he dodged away from me, laughing his head off. Zachy sees monsters everywhere, Adam teased, grinning at Emmy and Annie. He thinks when he opens his locker door, a monster will jump out at him. They giggled again. Give me a break. We're going to be late, I muttered. I turned away from their grinning faces. I turned the lock on my locker and pulled open the door. Then I knelt down to pull out my books, and something leapt out of my locker. I saw a white flash. Huh? I cried out, and another one jumped out, and then I gasped when something plopped onto my head. Something alive. I fell to my knees, reached up to grab for it. I felt its claws tangle in my hair. Help! I cried. Help me! Chapter 11. The creature moved across my head and dropped down the back of my shirt. Its hot body slid down my skin. Its claws prickled and pinched. Help me! Help! I jumped up, kicking and stomping and squirming. I frantically slapped at my back. Adam stepped up to me. He grabbed me by the shoulders, then tugged open the back of my shirt and plucked the creature off my back. He held his hand in front of my face. "Wow, what a monster," he exclaimed. "That's scary." Still trembling, I stared at the creature. A white mouse. A little white mouse. Emmy and Annie were doubled over beside Adam, laughing their heads off. Even Alex was laughing. Great friend, huh? "Zachy, I guess you really do see monsters everywhere, even teeny white ones," Annie exclaimed. That got them all laughing again. "Did you see that awesome dance he did?" Adam asked. Adam did an imitation of my frantic dance. He slapped at his head and neck and stomped wildly on the floor. "Excellent," Emmy and Annie declared together. They all laughed again. Alex stopped laughing and stepped up beside me. She brushed something off my shoulder. "Mouse hair," she murmured. Then she turned to the others. "We should give Zachy a break. Someday he's going to be a famous horror writer," she told him. "Someday he's going to be a famous chicken," Annie exclaimed. Emmy made clucking sounds and flapped her elbows. "Do you believe it? The famous horror writer is afraid of mice," Adam cried. Emmy and Annie thought that was really funny. Their red hair bobbed up and down as they laughed. Emmy glanced at her watch and gasped, "We're really late." She and her sister spun around and ran down the hall. Adam put the mouse in his pocket and went tearing after them. I knelt down to pull my books from the bottom of my locker. I reached in carefully. I had to make sure there were no more mice. Alex stood over me. "You okay?" she asked softly. "Go away," I snapped. "What did I do?" Alex demanded. "Just go away," I muttered. I didn't want her around. I didn't want anyone around. I felt like a total jerk. Why did I let little mice scare me like that? Why did I have to freak out in front of everyone? Because I'm a total jerk, I decided. I shoved books in a binder into my backpack. Then I stood up and started to close my locker. Alex leaned against the wall. "I told you to go away," I snapped at her again. She started to reply, but stopped when Mr. Conklin, the principal, turned the corner. Mr. Conklin is a tall, pencil-thin man with a narrow red face, big ears that stick out like jug handles. He talks really fast, always runs instead of walking, and always seems to be moving in 8 directions at once. He eyed Alex, then me. "Who let the mice out of the silent slab?" he demanded breathlessly. They were in Zachy's locker," Alex started. Before she could explain the rest, Mr. Conklin narrowed his eyes at me. His face grew even redder. "Zachy, I'd like to see you in my office right now," he ordered. Chapter 12. I didn't say much at dinner. I kept wondering if I should tell Mom and Dad about my adventures at school that day, but I decided to keep silent. I need them laughing at me too, and I didn't need them asking a million questions about what Mr. Conklin said to me. He had been pretty nice about it, actually. He just warned me to try to keep live creatures out of my locker. After dinner, Dad and I loaded the dishwasher and cleaned up. I was sponging off the dinner table when Alex appeared. "How's it going?" she asked. "Did Mr. Conklin—" I slapped a hand over her mouth to shut her up. I could see Mom and Dad watching from the other room. "What about Mr. Conklin?" Mom demanded. "He's a nice guy," I replied. I dragged Alex to the den. "So, how's it going?" she repeated. "How's it going? How's it going? How can you ask me how it's going?" "Well," she started, "it's going terrible. I had the worst day. Kids were laughing at me all day. Everywhere I went, kids made mouse faces at me and squeaked at me." She started to smile, but cut it off. "I don't know why I lost it like that this morning. I felt so dumb. It was just a joke. No big deal," Alex interrupted. Easy for you to say. You didn't have 100 disgusting rodents crawling all over your body. 100, Alex said. How about one? It seemed like 100. I mumbled. I decided to change the subject. Look at this. I walked over to the desk by the window. After school, I had worked there for 3 hours. I picked up a stack of pages. What are those? Alex asked, following me to the desk. My new blob monster story, I replied, holding up the handwritten pages. I'm making it even scarier. Alex took the pages from my hand and shuffled through them, then narrowed her eyes at me. You didn't type them on that old typewriter? Of course not. I always write the first draft by hand. I don't type my stories until I've got them just right. I took the pages back, and I picked up the pen from the desk. I used the antique pen that woman gave me in the shop, I told Alex. What a great pen. It writes so smoothly. I can't believe she gave it to me for free. Alex laughed. You're such a weird guy, Zachy. You get so excited about things like pens and typewriters. I think it's cool. I glanced over my story. Now it's time to type it. I'm so excited. I can't wait to use the old typewriter. I led the way into my room. I was halfway to my desk when I stopped and let out a startled cry. The typewriter was gone. Chapter 13. Alex and I both gaped at the empty spot on the front of my desk. Alex pushed her glasses up and squinted. It's gone, I murmured weakly. My knees started to buckle. I grabbed my dresser to hold myself up. Weird, Alex muttered, shaking her head. Are you sure? It just disappeared into thin air, I interrupted. I don't believe this. How? How could it disappear? How could what disappear? A voice called from the doorway. I whirled around to see Dad lumber heavily into the room. He carried the old typewriter in his arms. Dad, why? I started. He set it down on the desk, then pushed his curly black hair off his forehead and grinned at me. I cleaned it for you, Zachy, and put in a new ribbon. He wiped sweat off his forehead with the back of his hand. Ribbons are hard to find these days. No one uses typewriters anymore. Alex laughed. Zachy thought the typewriter disappeared into thin air. I flashed Alex an angry look. Alex, give me a break, I whispered. She made a face at me. Dad shook his head. It's a little too heavy to disappear into thin air. It weighs a ton, more than a computer. I walked over to the typewriter and ran my hand over the smooth, dark metal. Thanks for cleaning it up, Dad. It looks awesome. A few of the keys were sticking, so I oiled them up. I think the old machine is working fine now, Zachy. You should be able to write some great stories on it. Thanks, Dad, I repeated. I couldn't wait to get started. I reached into my top drawer for some paper. Then I noticed that Dad hadn't left. He was lingering by the door, watching Alex and me. Your mom went across the street to visit Janet Hawkins, our new neighbor. It's such a beautiful spring night. I thought maybe you two would like to take a walk into town to get some ice cream. No thanks. I already had dessert at home before I came over, Alex replied. And I really wanted to get started typing my new scary story, I told him. He sighed and looked disappointed. I think he really wanted an excuse to get ice cream. As soon as he left, I dropped into my desk chair. I slid a fresh white sheet of paper into the typewriter roller. Alex pulled up a chair and sat beside me. Can I try the typewriter after you? She asked. Yes, after me, I replied impatiently. I really wanted to get my story typed. I let my eyes wander over the round black keys. Then I leaned forward and started to type. Typing on a typewriter is a lot different from typing on a keyboard. For one thing, you have to press the keys a lot harder. It took me a few tries to get the feel of it. Then I typed the first words of the story. It was a dark and stormy night. Hey! I uttered a cry as lightning flashed in my bedroom window. Rain pounded on the glass. A sharp roar of thunder shook the house. Darkness swept over me as all the lights went out. "Zachy?" Alex cried in a tiny voice. "Zachy? Zachy, are you all right?" Chapter 14. I swallowed hard. "Yeah, I'm okay," I said quietly. Alex is the only person in the world who knows that I am afraid of the dark. I'm afraid of mice, and I'm afraid of the dark. I admit it. And I'm afraid of a lot of other things. I'm afraid of big dogs. I'm afraid of going down to the basement when I'm all alone in the house. I'm afraid of jumping into the deep end of the swimming pool. I've told Alex about some of my fears, but not all of them. I mean, it's kind of embarrassing. Why do I write scary stories if I'm afraid of so many things? I don't know. Maybe I write better stories because I know what being scared feels like. "The lights went off so suddenly," Alex said. She stood beside me, leaning over my desk to look out the window. "Usually they flicker or something." Sheets of rain pounded against the window pane. Jagged streaks of lightning crackled across the sky. I stayed in my desk chair, gripping the arms tightly. I'm glad Adam isn't here. He'd just make fun of me. "But you're not very scared now, are you?" Alex asked. An explosion of thunder made me nearly jump out of the chair. "A little," I confessed. And then I heard the footsteps. Heavy, thudding footsteps from out in the hall. Thunder roared again. I spun away from the window and listened to the footsteps, thudding heavily on the carpet. "Who's there?" I called through the darkness. I saw a flicker of yellow light in the doorway. A shadow swept over the wallpaper in the hall. Dad stepped into the room. "This is so weird," he said. He was carrying 2 candles in candlesticks. Their flames bent and nearly went out as he carried them to my desk. "Where did that storm come from?" Dad asked, setting the candles beside my typewriter. "Are you okay, Zachy?" I forgot. Dad also knows that I am scared of the dark. "I'm fine. Thanks for the candles." Dad stared out the window. We couldn't really see anything out there. The rain was coming down too hard. "The sky was clear a few seconds ago," Dad said, leaning over me to get a better view. "I can't believe such a big storm could blow in so quickly." "It's weird," I agreed. We stared at the rain for a minute or so. Sheets of lightning made the backyard glow like silver. "I'm going to call your mother. I'm going to tell her to wait out the storm," Dad said. He patted me on the back and then headed to the door. "Don't you want a candle?" I called after him. "No, I'll find my way. I have a flashlight in the basement." He disappeared down the hall. "What do you want to do now?" Alex asked. Her face looked orange in the candlelight. Her eyes glowed like cat eyes. I turned back to the typewriter. It would be cool to write by candlelight. Scary stories should always be written by candlelight. I'll bet that's how all the famous horror writers write their stories. "Cool. Go ahead," Alex replied. I slid the candlestick closer. The yellow light flickered over the typewriter keys. I leaned forward and read over the first sentence of my story. "It was a dark and stormy night." Then I hit the spacebar and typed the next sentence. "The wind began to howl." I hit the spacebar again and raised my fingers to type the next sentence, but a rattling noise made me jump. "What is that?" "The window," Alex pointed. Outside, the wind blew hard, rattling the window pane. Over the steady roar of the rain, I heard another sound, a strange howl. I gripped the arms of my desk chair. "Do you hear that?" I asked Alex. She nodded, her eyes squinted out the window. "It's just the wind. It's howling through the trees," she said softly. Outside, the howling grew louder as the wind swirled around my house. The window rattled and shook. The howling grew high and shrill, almost like a human voice, a human wail. I felt a chill run down my back. Gripping the chair arm tightly, I struggled to keep my fear down. It's just a storm, I told myself. Just a rainstorm. Just a lot of rain and wind. I glanced at the words I had typed. In the flickering orange light, the black type jumped out at me. The wind began to howl. I listened to the shrill howl outside. It seemed to surround me, surround the house. How strange, I muttered. And then things got a lot stranger. Chapter 15. You're not getting very far with the story, Alex said. Well, the storm, I started. She put a hand on my shoulder. You're shaking, she exclaimed. No, I'm not, I lied. Yes, you are. You're shaking, she insisted. No way. I'm okay, really, I said, trying to keep my voice calm and steady. I'm not that afraid, Alex. Maybe if you work on the story, you won't think about the storm so much, she suggested. Right, the story, I agreed. An explosion of thunder shook the house. I let out a sharp cry. Why does it seem so close? The lightning and thunder, it sounds as if it's all right in the backyard. Alex grabbed my shoulders and turned me to the typewriter. Type, she ordered. Pretend there is no storm. Just type. I obediently raised my hands to the keys of the old typewriter. The candles had burned down a little, and the page was shadowy and dark. I typed the next sentence. Alex and Zachy were alone in the dark house, listening to the storm. Rain pounded hard against the window. In a white flash of lightning, I could see the trees in the backyard bending and trembling in the howling wind. The story is about us? Alex asked, leaning over my shoulder to read what I had typed. Of course. You know that I always write about us and the other kids at school. It makes it easier to describe everyone. Well, don't let the blob monster eat me. I want to be the hero, not the dinner, she instructed. I laughed. A crash of thunder made me jump, though. I turned back to the typewriter. I squinted to read over the sentences I had typed. The candles aren't giving enough light. How did writers do it in the old day? They must all go blind. Let's go get more candles, Alex suggested. Good idea, I agreed. We each picked up a candlestick. Holding them in front of us, we made our way down the hall. The candles bent and flickered. Our footsteps were drowned out by the steady roar of rain on the roof. Dad? Hey, Dad, we need more candles, I called out. No reply. We stepped into the living room. 2 candles glowed on the mantelpiece. 2 more stood side by side on the coffee table in front of the couch. Dad, where are you? I called out. Holding our candles high, Alex and I made our way to the den, then the kitchen, then Mom and Dad's bedroom. No Dad. Holding my candle tightly in one hand, I pulled open the door to the basement. Dad, are you down there? Silence. I felt another tingling chill run down my back. I turned to Alex. He's gone. We're all alone.